So we're going to talk about, first of all, current situation. And as a product manager, that's the first thing you do, right? As I'm coming into a new client, a new environment, a new company, when I'm being engaged, I usually will do this. My first 90 days in any new contract is to assess a company. And assessment means more than just a company. Assessing means there are 5 components to the way you assess, and it starts with assess the business climate, which is what we're going to talk about here. What is the current climate? And I'm going to talk about specifically information that I found because COVID-19 crisis has generated so much data that is just overwhelming. There's so much information available because it's one of the best documented pandemics ever in the human history. And the issues is that there's way too much information. And the second issue is that there's also a lot of misinformation. And that's a struggle because trying to really get the current situation is a lot of work because the amount of data is overwhelming and you have to be able to discern good information, facts and figures from misinformation. And you want to eliminate any misinformation in your data sources. That is the struggle of anyone that is doing big data analytics, for example. So today's environment, I'm going to talk about what McKinsey is saying because they're saying, what is the impact? And the impact may depend on the depth of disruption within your industry or your market or markets, the length of disruption, how long it takes for you to actually start seeing recovery and then start looking at the shape of recovery. How quickly are you going to be able to ramp up once recovery begins? So those are 3 elements that we need to start looking at and start predicting so that you can actually figure out how to throttle back, take your foot off the accelerator, maybe put on the brakes as you're seeing curves in the business climate, maybe U-turns or maybe those horseshoe turns, and then be able to accelerate when needed. And you're stopping, you're slowing down, stopping, and accelerating, and that's going to be some time all the way until recovery begins. So typically, all of these things are the things that you want to start gauging. Here's the impact. And the impact is, and this is actually something that McKinsey published just recently. This is for US market. There may be available this information by someone like McKinsey or Bain or Boston Consulting Group. It's information that is hard to come by, but McKinsey has made this available for free for the US market. And it shows the impact to industrial sectors within US. And you see in the highest impact in areas like commercial aerospace, oil and gas, air travel, insurance, banks. And on the other side of the spectrum, the ones that have had least amount of impact, economic impact, meaning these are the ones on the left are the ones that have significant drop in demand, right? No different than what some of you are saying. And then the ones that are seeing some drop in demand, but maybe are also overwhelmed with new orders because a new segment and a new buyer behavior has been triggered by this crisis. And what I want to do is I want to actually be able to ask you if you can tell me which of your industries, which of these industries is your current target industry. And what I want you to tell me is, in this case, I'm actually going to be closing this poll because I would really want to do is type, if you can type in on the questions box or your chat window, whichever is available, tell me which of these industrial sectors are your target sectors, meaning these are your customers, your targets, your product is targeting or you're selling into any of these industries. So how many of you are selling into commercial aerospace, oil and gas, or any energy company? How many of you are selling into insurance companies, not just life and business and other type of insurance, but also health plan providers, health insurers? How many of you are selling into banks? How many of you are selling into any investment firms that are all part of financial services? If those are your targets because they're seeing significant drop in demand, I would say you're suffering because they're ordering less than they were a year ago. And right now, even if you have a long-term contract, they're trying that says that they need to buy at a certain volume. They're trying to renegotiate that because they don't need to buy that much, and it's going to be a long time before they're at the same level of demand that they were even like at the beginning of this year. If you're targeting logistics, consumer, certain retail sectors, the ones that have been less impacted, you may be in that boat where you're not seeing very much demand, or you're seeing overwhelming demand, an increase in demand. What I wanted to find out is share that information, and then I can tell you what the impact is, because this allows you to start seeing. And even though this is US, in your market, you need to understand what this is, because who you're targeting may be deeply impacted, which means now they're going to be buying less from you if you're their supplier, if you're in their supply chain. And in very few cases, because we saw the poll, very few of you are seeing, it's not the majority, it's like 30% in this audience that is seeing either same demand or some increase in demand or overwhelming increase in demand. Some of these may be healthcare, right? If you're a hospital or a clinic right now, and you're the one that's in the front line of tending to anyone who has become infected with COVID-19 and now is showing symptoms, they're the ones that are overwhelmed with work. And therefore, anyone else that's part of the supply chain is also seeing a lot of work, right? And that means that in that scenario, it's also the actual people that are actually involved that are actually also overwhelmed. All the entire supply chain is actually seeing significant demand. So let's talk about moving on to this. If you can share that with you, and we can actually talk about which of these industries are you targeting, and if your targets are deeply impacted and now they're seeing significant demand, and if you're their supplier, you're also seeing less demand, and that's going to be a long term until recovery starts. So this is why you need to understand the current situation, because now you need to start seeing if maybe I need to target a different segment, even if it's an industrial segment, because there are segments that are growing and you need to start going after those quickly. Number 4, which of these is more likely to happen? Well, you can say, I wish for a quick recovery, but it may turn to be a significant recession, meaning it's going to take you at least a year, maybe more, to recover, or a depression, which means you're going to tank pretty quickly, but then getting back up to where it used to be is going to take you 2 to 3 years. Most people today, most experts are saying that this is going to be really more like a economic recession, but I think it's going to vary market by market, meaning each and every country is going to be impacted at different ways, and it can be anything between a significant recession, meaning significant unemployment, to possibly a depression, and hopefully it's not a depression of epic proportions. But here's what the snapshot is. And I think the worst case scenario is that if the entire COVID-19 spread, it can turn into a global recession, much like the 2007. And I think that all indicators right now, even though no economist is willing to fess up, is really we're trying to avoid getting into a global recession, because a global recession is bad news. So let's look at what McKinsey, because all of these are McKinsey things. So if you're a supplier to some of these industrial sectors that have seen a significant drop in demand, you're seeing a significant drop in demand, especially if you have a good diversification across industrial sectors, and hoping that some of these sectors are actually getting more or keeping the same demand while others are going down. And you basically want to make sure that some sectors are increasing demand and you're targeting them, while others may be dropping, others are rising, and others are staying the same. And you may have a combination of all of these three. But if you're not, then you need to start doing that. And I can tell you that it's going to be about figuring out which of the elements of the mix would you want to rely on to actually quickly figure out how to reposition your product and working with your teams to do so. So the hardest hit sectors may not see restart until 2021. This is what McKinsey is saying about US market. This may not be the same thing as your market because this has to be done for your market. Here's what the impact is, because what you see here in the 1930s, this dip in gross domestic product for US is the Great Depression. This dip here in the 1940s is due to post-World War II economic recovery. And you see here that we haven't had anything, and even the last recession in US, which was in 2007, we recovered around 2009, 2010. Right now, McKinsey is estimating the current impact of COVID-19 in US based on real GDP estimated for 2020. This recession in US is going to be deeper than our last recession, and a close second to the recession that was post-World War II. And this is 20th century stuff. 21st century is here. What I wanted to say is that this is the reality, right? That this COVID-19 right now is actually right now estimated that base case scenario is still going to be worse impact than the 2007 recession we had in US. And at the worst case, it's going to be almost as high impact across industrial sectors as post-World War II recession, and not even close to the Great Depression which we had in the 1930s in US. But this is significant because there's no CEO, there's no living CEO today that has been able to figure out how to turn around their company, their product, with this type of recession. And that's reality in US today. And I think that we're going to have to figure out what is that you can do if in your country, in your market, with your customers, if this is going to be a challenge for your executives, how can you step up as a product manager for them to understand this current situation and figure out how to actually get your product team to persevere until recovery starts. And it is possible to do, but you have to do product management the right way.